Renna's Crossing by Geordie Morse. This is an audio version of the book as read by the author. Chapter 20. The Last One Laughs with Silence. The tea kettle whistled, and its contents were poured into 3 mugs sitting at the ready. A 4th was there too, but it did not get filled. You think Veronica is gonna skip out on dinner again? Renna asked Noida, watching her pour the tea. Noida shrugged and returned the cup to the cabinet. She'll have something later. She's been preoccupied with the extra training Regana's been giving her. This was the 3rd meal in a row that Veronica had simply not shown up for at all. Each time her sister made an excuse about her training. Ever since Renna's breakthrough with Regana, she had gone from worst to almost first. A strong second, as Lucy was never one to be shown up by a novice to the craft, which Renna technically still was in comparison. Renna's record with fly killing and the other training routines was about even with Noida at this point, though she felt they were coming at it from 2 different paths. Noida had years of experience that Renna could never hope to catch up on, and in terms of magic theory and proper procedures, Noida outclassed her easily. However, when it came down to actually casting a spell, Renna often managed to stay on par with, or even exceed her cousin's abilities. If Noida was frustrated by this, she hid it well, at least as well as Renna contained her excitement at seeing herself progress with satisfying speed. Renna had realized only recently, and with a bit of guilt, that this change in the pecking order left Veronica struggle by herself, when before her cousin had at least been content to joke with Renna about their shared ineptitude. But last place was a harsh place to be under Regana's tutelage, and earning extra training sessions was likely not doing much for a pugnacious spirit like Veronica's. She mentioned this last part to Noida, hoping to glean some insight into one twin's situation through the eyes of the other, but she was rebuked. Ronnie would not be doing the extra training if she didn't agree to it. Regana knows what she needs, just as she did for you. Noida had finished her dinner and took a second small plate to the secret door with her. Our studies will continue to get harder, and once they do, you'll need to keep focusing on yourself, just like we all do. Renna watched the secret door turn back into an unassuming set of shelves once Noida had made her way through it and up the treacherously narrow stairs. Now Renna was wondering about her other cousin, too. Still feeling the sting of the implication she had left just before, it wouldn't be surprising if Noida was feeling the pressure of not being outdone by the talent rising up to meet her. Now it was only Lucy who was left unperturbed, still confident in her position as the strongest witch of the group. This was undisputable, for now. Why are you staring, Renna? Renna, who had indeed been watching Lucy and her cards for a while, but was at the moment looking out the grungy window, turned back to her. She guessed Lucy had been planning that conversation starter for a while, but Renna had unwittingly messed up her timing. Sorry, I was just watching you use your cards. It looks interesting. Flattery always seemed to be the safe way to go with Lucy, when you wanted to talk to her without the usual headway of condescension. A small smirk on her face told Renna that she had put the right foot forward. I wasn't reading anything at the moment. This deck likes a lot of attention, so to keep it from becoming ornery, I sometimes simply shuffle the cards about like this. Every deck is different, you see. They all have their own personalities once you get to know them. Like people? Yes, but people give far less enlightening answers to your questions. The tarot has a much stronger connection to the forces beyond us. And if you know how to listen, there's so much they can tell you. So you can really tell the future with those things? Lucy's face soured at the term things. That's just a start. If you know how to use them properly, you can deduce what fate has hidden in store for anyone. That's how Regana kept tabs on you as soon as the twins found you had come to Grotany. What? You were able to watch me with your tarot cards? Not watch you directly. I drew readings about you and saw the threads that pulled you along your destined path. I knew you would be coming here sooner or later, and thus so did Regana. Renna blanched as fate made its appearance again. It was an uncomfortably common theme in Renna's life lately, especially when it appeared that Lucy was more in touch with Renna's fate than Renna herself was. But perhaps now was her opportunity to force its hand. I see, but the cards can be wrong sometimes, right? Lucy's smirk remained unperturbed. What a naive thing to say. Tarot is not a card trick, Renna. Those who can't understand the messages given to them are simply too inexperienced or stupid to comprehend what they're being told. If what the tarot reveals to you does not come to pass, it's not the fault of the cards, but the fault of the interpreter. So you've never been wrong with your card readings, then? This caused several muscles in Lucy's neck and face to contract for a moment, exactly the reaction Renna had hoped for. I have not. I have been extensively trained in my craft, and my proficiency in this path of magic is nothing you could even imagine. If you have doubts, Renna, it's just because you're scared of what the cards might tell you. Renna would have liked to deny that, but she knew better. Mastering fear was not as simple as Regana made it sound. Whatever. In that case, maybe you could do a reading for me? You should be able to tell me about my future, right? About what's in store? Lucy didn't answer right away, preferring to savor her momentary position of authority as she scooped up all the cards from the table and began shuffling them in her hands. I'm not feeling up to answering your simple-minded provocation. Let's do this instead. Come here and shuffle the cards yourself, so they can feel your energy. Then draw one card from the deck. Once you see it, you'll have plenty to think about. Renna didn't like how Lucy had swept aside her ruse. She had been hoping to harness Lucy's so-called proficiency and pride to get some easy answers. What can a single card tell me? More than you'd like to know, I'm sure. Renna saw at this point there was no backing out. The gauntlet had been thrown. Fine, let's do it. Lucy shuffled the cards a couple more times, then slid them across the table to Renna. Remember, before you draw, you should shuffle them first. Renna did so, clumsily, for they were bigger than normal playing cards and not made of the same slick material. As she moved them about in her hands, she tried to feel for any magical auras they might be emitting. There was something, but it was magic unlike Renna had ever encountered before. Her fingers were dipping into the flow of many different conversations, each colored with different thoughts and emotions. It felt like watching strangers from afar play out a situation that was easy to recognize by the cadence of their voices and the theatrics of their actions. Renna still didn't understand what Lucy meant about each deck having its own personality, but whatever it entailed, she was less skeptical now about what these cards were capable of. Ready? Renna took the hint and finished shuffling, placing the deck on the table in front of her. She stared down at the card on top, whose backside was decorated with some kind of floral regalia, alternating in sky blue and white. It was pretty, but Renna felt like she was looking at a closed door with her hand on the knob. Then the impetuousness that had caused her to accept the challenge flared up again, and she resolutely took hold of an edge. Her fingers tensed. What could a single card possibly know about her? Breathing in and hoping for something she didn't know yet, she drew the card with a dramatic flourish and brought it up close to her vision. For a moment, Renna was thoroughly confused as to what she was looking at. She then realized the card was upside down and switched it around. 16. The Tower. An image of a large medieval castle tower against a black background. It was a scene of disaster. Lightning struck the tower's dome and great clouds rained fire. People were diving out of the windows to what appeared to be their doom. To modern aesthetics, however, the artwork was too flat and overdramatic to escape a sense of black comedy. Well, let me see. Renna didn't like indulging Lucy's impatience, but she could make no sense of the image herself. She revealed it to the older witch, and upon first glance a haughty smile spread across her face as swiftly as spilled milk. Ah, of course. Well, that only makes sense now, doesn't it? When you think about it, it could have only been that. care to share your insights? Renna grumbled at her. As far as I know, Carnarthix doesn't have any tall towers. So if this is indicating they're going to fall out of one sometime soon, I think your deck might have gotten something wrong. Lucy waved her sass away. It's metaphorical, of course. This might be a bit too obtuse for a novice to grasp, but the progression of the major arcana of the tarot can be interpreted as a spiritual journey. When I read it from that perspective, it's clear why this card appeared. Enlighten me, please. You can think of this tower as your sense of reality. Everything you believe in, your morality, determination, ideals, all that kind of stuff. Renna looked at the picture again. So the fact that it looks like some kind of apocalypse means that I'm having some sort of spiritual meltdown? In a manner of speaking. It indicates that something in your life that normally keeps you stable or grounded is in mortal danger. A force much greater than yourself, outside of your control, is acting up on you and causing a change. If you can't handle that change, turmoil, Lucy's nail tapped the catastrophic image, is the inevitable result. While there was no way for Lucy to have known about the turmoil going on in Renna's head right now, her explanation was unnervingly relatable. Despite being a person that Renna thought of as more of as a rival than an ally, she saw Lucy now as a rare source of advice. So what do I do? Does it just mean I'm going to get screwed by whatever this changing force is? Lucy was watching her face closely. Unlike Regana, she was willing to wander into Renna's eyes. When Renna tried to complete the connection, her curiosity was met with bristly hesitation, like an animal who was one step too close to an untrusted human. Lucy preferred to observe and scrutinize without being interacted with. There's no right way out of a storm, Renna. All you can do is try not to go down with your ship. Those who aren't wrecked by their tribulations will grow stronger from them. But how? Renna wasn't sure what kind of answer she expected from Lucy. Her frustration had managed to escape her. The longer she stayed here in this house, the more she felt like she was moving forward, up a steep, rocky hill, always in sight of the summit, but never managing to crest it to see what was on the other side. She was learning fast, but not fast enough. She was tapping into her intuitive energies, but they weren't strong enough. Her past still teased her, and she was never fast enough to catch it. Everything was just beyond her, always an inch beyond the struggles of her growth. Everything she wanted to know, which terrified her to know, was waiting for her just beyond that. Lucy looked back at the agitated Renna with almost clinical disinterest. To borrow one of Regana's favorite phrases, next time, succeed, don't just try. Thanks, I'll go and just do that. Renna turned away and rushed out of the kitchen, back up the stairs towards her room. Part of her figured that Lucy might have just been toying with her this whole time, trying to push her into a state of mind where Renna would mess up and then Lucy would be the undisputed better of the two in Regana's eyes. But Renna didn't care as much as Lucy did about earning Regana's mythical praise. Every day spent in this house was pulling her apart more and more. If playing the game would stop the game from playing with her, so be it. Renna had plenty of emotions to harness that weren't despair. Sarah found Job in the small chapel tucked into one of the far corners of the rectory. They were alone, sitting on a pew just before the modest pulpit. They might have been praying. Their back was slightly hunched, indicating some kind of introspection. Sarah was never one to break a good silence, so she let the scene last for a few minutes, wondering how she should make her approach. Job didn't stir in that time. She contemplated leaving and waiting until later, perhaps just before dinner. But the feeling that had pushed her all the way down here from her room put a steadying hand against her back once again. This should happen now. Sarah walked down the aisle and stopped a couple rows shy of Job's seat. Again, she found that she couldn't be the wind to disturb the snowy silence that perched atop every surface. She had never wanted to be the one to leave the first footprints in fresh powder. Sarah hadn't spent a lot of time in churches, especially after moving up to Groutney. The ones down in New Orleans had always been raucous places, full of song and spirit. She saw now that some people preferred to lift their prayers up to God, while others sat and waited in their space, and while others sat and waited until their space was sacred enough to receive him. Thankfully, Job spoke. "Anything you need, Sarah?" "Sorry for disturbing you." "Not at all. My mind was not anywhere in particular. This has always been a place of solitude for me, and I find myself coming back here often." Job did indeed seem more composed now than at any point in the last week. They were not pacing, they were not muttering to themselves, they were not staring at the window with arms tightly crossed, stewing in an aura that made everyone else give them a wide berth. It was a welcome change. "You definitely seem calmer," Sarah pointed out. "Yes, well, I like to think that I've regained some inner calm over the past few days. Maybe I've just been allowing my thoughts to distract me. It takes a little bit, to get back into the swing of things after traveling." "I'm sure." "Anyway, was there something you wanted to talk with me about?" "Ah, yes." Despite her determination, she had to think about how she wanted the words to come out. Job had elected to peacefully keep their eyes closed and simply listen to Sarah's thoughts. Well, I decided that you should know. Renna is at Karanarthex." The beautiful stillness that Sarah had tried not to depose was suddenly blasted up with abandon as Job left to their feet faster than she had seen anyone do so before, and reached the doors of the chapel just as Sarah's pursuing gaze was able to catch up. Sarah had never been one for moving any place in a great hurry, so she was just barely able to tail Job by listening to them rushing down hallways, up staircases, and through doors. She arrived, a bit short of breath, in one of the study rooms on the second floor. 5 books were already discarded face open on the table as Job pawed through a 6th one. "I should have known," Job said as they tore apart the words on the pages before them. "I thought that the place had been long abandoned, but what better darkness for twins like them to crawl out of? I know we have a map here somewhere. It's not all that far if I leave within the next 10 minutes for town." Sarah was relieved that Job didn't stop and question her about how she knew about this when they didn't, or how she had found out, or why she had chosen to withhold the information up until this point. It had taken the better part of 2 days to finally receive an answer from Père Carrefour. Interacting with him had also been a tumultuous process. Although Sarah, in a way, had a privileged connection to many of the saints, despite being a novice spirit medium, she lacked critical knowledge and expertise regarding how to interact with such exalted spirits on an individual basis. It was a skill that many people considered their honorable profession, and for an uninitiated witch like Sarah to even attempt it could be seen as foolish at best. But at long last, she had received a message that she was able to interpret. Even if she's confident, a magpie shouldn't fly at night. This was enough to convince Sarah that her friend was in some sort of trouble. Still, she had been conflicted as to whether she needed to hold out on her trust. But now into the 2nd week of Renna's absence, her desire for her friend's safety overwhelmed her, and she made her decision. She just hoped that, with all hope in her, that she hadn't done so too late. "Got it." Job snapped a thin book shut and clapped Sarah on her shoulder. "I know enough to make my way there. I'm heading out immediately. If you see Father Chen, fill him in for me, if you would. I'm not coming back without her." Sarah nodded and stepped aside to let Job leave the room with speed. At the door, they caught themselves and turned back for a moment. "And thank you, Sarah." Sarah nodded again, feeling a weight lift from her shoulders. Job's last stop was their own room, to grab some traveling gear. A backpack, flashlight, cash, and some basic magic tools. They swept aside the remains of their spell work from the last few days, and that covered nearly every surface in their narrow quarters. Their main focus had been to try and produce a tracking spell that could locate Renna and point the way to her, but they had simply not been able to overcome their own damning ineptitude with just that sort of magic. It had failed them back in Grotany when Sarah had gone missing, and this time it had produced nothing but days of failure and frustration for them. It was part of their craft that Job realized they shouldn't have ignored for so long. But no matter now, they had their course. Shades of fuchsia and orange spread themselves out comfortably against the deepening blues of the evening sky as Job leapt straight through the ward. They knew it would trigger alarms back inside the rectory, but they didn't have time to open and close it carefully. They also knew that Father Chen would probably not be happy about having one of the vehicles being taken out quite a ways beyond town. But Job couldn't imagine such a transgression making it into the top 10 of things they had done to make the father mad at their time at the rectory. Act now, apologize later, and bring Renna back safely. Acceptable. Renna got up, closed her circle with what looked like experienced grace, and gave Lucy a smirk as she walked back to her peers, which was not returned in kind. She still had yet to hear any greater praise than acceptable from Morgana, but at least she was getting them with satisfying regularity over the past couple days. At this point, she had serious doubts that the grading scale curved any higher, and thus she was back in the comfortable spot of being an excellent student at whatever she tried to do. Her strengths of intuition, quick learning, and making connections could serve her as her main tools for success once again. She might not be ahead of Lucy yet, but they were breaking even enough during contests and training that Lucy had lost a fair amount of her supercilious attitude towards Renna, replaced, of course, by glowering spite. What was more, it seemed like a big turning point had been the tarot card incident in the kitchen. Renna was no longer wasting time trying to make everything fit in her head. It was simpler to just go with the flow. Each challenge she encountered, each obstacle that dared come into her path, it made her indignation rise up, cresting into a dark wave that smashed the waters she had spent so much effort trying to keep still before. And each time, power answered her summons. And whenever it was not enough, she found a way to dig deeper. She was getting better at utilizing magic circles for her spells, thanks to the Book of Abramelin explaining the connection between spiritual energy and memory. At one point, Renna had needed something to push her spell over the edge, and the old dirty vial of black nail polish from her jacket pocket has served as a convenient sacrifice. She had felt guilty in the moment, and a bit more so after, but that had been one of the most advanced spells she had ever managed to cast, so she assured herself that progress made up for it. Things were starting to come back. Not full memories, but feelings that had consumed her in her first years at Inglenook. It felt like walking past a prison cell and staring into the eyes of old enemies, remembering why she hated them. No longer would they have their pleasure in tormenting her day and night. She called the shots now, because she was a witch whose craft could make her will their master. These savage emotions were the dogs she called forth when she wanted something broken, something bent, something twisted, something rent. And yet, she was still afraid. Afraid of what? The demon, perhaps? Was she strong enough to fight the demon now? Would she be able to succeed where her grandmother had failed and perished? Something always told her no. When she unleashed her hexing, it certainly felt powerful. But when she took a mental step back to examine the limits of her craft, she could still see her starting point as a novice back over her shoulder. She dove into the Book of Abramelin for more answers. Morgana's training was making more things clear to her, and she could take further steps down the scrawling lists of formula of the mysterious author's work. More often than not these days, it wasn't her magical ineptitude that interrupted her studies. It was a sudden gap of information in the readings. The book was more of a collection than a single narrative, Renna was aware. But now that she had a basic understanding of the maze, it was much clearer where all the dead ends were. If only someone had thought to scrawl in that one extra line of text or explanation into the margins that would help her make the logical leap along with them and continue onward, rather than stopping her at the edge of the unknown while she stared longingly at the other side. When Renna was not practicing magic or studying, she slept. She rarely saw the light leave her room before she was down for the count, and pushing herself out of bed in the morning was always a process, as, no matter how many hours she got, they seemed to do little to restore her. She far preferred it to insomnia, though. In the brief times when Renna found herself without her studies to think about, she remembered just how many walls, rooms, floors, and secrets lay between her and the other humans she shared the gloomy house with. It was in those times when she felt slightly unreal. Thoughts that came to her so naturally during the day suddenly seemed frightening and foreign. It was hard for her to accept that they were hers and not someone else's. That was Renna, the prodigal sorceress. This was Renna, foolish 16-year-old runaway girl who was used to waking up to the sound of commotion downstairs in the kitchen, and jumping out of bed to stop Naren from adding bugs to the pancake batter. Extra flavor and calcium. Or persuade Derek not to scale the bookshelf, before breakfast, at least. Why was she not there? Why was she here in this hollow mansion, alone with her family whom she didn't really like that much? Fortunately, before her memories could drive her to despair, sleep always pressed her eyes closed and washed away her homesickness for a new day of the same thing. Now that it was clear to all that Renna had surpassed both sisters in their training, the twins had become even more scarce around the house. There had been a couple times when Renna had tried to reach out to her cousins to attempt to re-establish a connection. She had once caught Noida exiting her room. However, any attempt at fraternization was received coldly. Renna had only been trying to find some common bond in how harsh Regana's training was at times, but Noida saw it as needless complaining. You should keep in mind, Renna, that some people have to work much harder than you to accomplish what you and Lucy are doing. As Regana said, true talent runs in the blood of the few. I don't really get it, though. She's your grandmother, right? So shouldn't you and Zeronica have that same blood? We do. But even with blood, other factors come into play. Geniuses can be born rich, too, you know. There's just more to it than that. Lucy isn't related to us. Believe it or not, she's the only one in her extended family with any talent for the craft. This surprised Renna. I never would have guessed that. She's so strong. Yeah, she's talented in different ways. As long as she can make the high grade, Regana approves of her. She must have been trained incredibly hard in the years that she was traveling. She's on a whole different level than she was before. Right, you mentioned that before. Back when she trained with you two? Noida reaffirmed this fact. She and Zeronica were rivals back then. They were constantly fighting, but they also got along. I was the one lagging behind at that time, but I didn't really mind that much. It was different. Renna saw her cousin cast her memory back to a time that made her bitter face soften for a moment. That sounds kind of nice, actually, Renna said, picking up the word that Noida had decided not to use. Noida pushed the sentiment aside. That was a long time ago now. It's not important anymore. The point is, Renna, that you might want to take into consideration the other people who have a right to be envious of the talent you have. In this world, there are consequences to being less than extraordinary. Noida's gaze lingered on something beyond Renna for a noticeable moment before she retreated back inside her room. Renna had not managed a more amicable conversation with Noida since then. Zeronica, far from keeping her promise of hanging out with her cool cousin, was rarely present at all. The last time Renna had even seen her was when she had been heading down to the kitchen one morning and noticed the door of the twins' room to be ajar. From the vantage point it offered, Renna could only see Zeronica's side of the room. She hadn't expected anyone to be in there, given the lack of noise, but she had been surprised to see Zeronica sitting cross-legged on her bed, absorbed in the music of her headphones while either writing or drawing on large sheets of paper in a notepad. She had been surrounded by several finished pieces, or failures, and continued to work in a mental space that was likely beyond the walls of Karanarthex. Renna had felt like she was watching a tiger or an excitable dog that wasn't aware of her presence. Given how Veronica acted whenever there was someone else around to antagonize, it had been strange to see how chilled out she could be on her own. Renna had toyed with the idea of making herself known, which might initiate a conversation that would help her get to know her cousin better. While hope had allowed her to entertain the prospect, there was also reality that offered up a dozen less pleasant ways in which the interaction could go. Ultimately, Renna had stuck to the pragmatic path, leading her away from the room without knocking and heading downstairs. She couldn't give it too much thought anyway. She had enough to focus on herself, without sparing worries for others. It was at another tense mealtime with Lucy that Renna finally found a lead. They had just finished the first practice in which Renna had felt she had fared better in more tests than Lucy had. It seemed she wasn't the only one who thought so either. Lucy had slunk into the kitchen in a right foul, but thankfully silent mood, and waited until Renna finished making dinner. Renna felt that the evening could finish without an encounter, as Lucy seemed to be waiting for her to make the first move. However, Renna was not a gloater. Growing up surrounded by kids who were constantly trying new things, whether or not they were encouraged, had raised her with a very blunted competitive edge. She was competitive with herself, true enough. That part of her was pushing her forward these days, to become as strong as she could. But unless she was caught up in the moment, she didn't actually care too much about competing with Lucy. Or at least, not nearly as much as Lucy cared. And this fact was likely something that bothered Lucy just as much as the actual event of losing to Renna in any capacity. "It's that book, you know. You've had your nose in it a lot lately. I suppose you've found something that's been a great help to you recently." Renna was still not quite used to this, Lucy's habit of curtailing the opening half of a conversation, which she had evidently already run through in her head, and pulling her desired target into the thick of it without formality or shame. Renna had a strange appreciation for it, though, as unnerving as it was. It reminded her of some of the Homer's social quirks from Inglenook. Once you got past the strangeness of it, you felt like you knew the person a little better. It was one of the rare gaps in Lucy's armor. It was one of the rare gaps in the armor of Lucy's prideful demeanor. "Sorry, you're talking about the Book of Abramelin?" "Of course. The one you took from the library when the twins were the one you took from the library where the twins were before. They told me a bit about it. When you have access to a grimoire like that, it's all too easy to see where your advantage comes from." Renna shrugged, not going for Lucy's attempt at provocation. "It's definitely helpful, but there are a lot of points where I find information missing. I wish I had more resources that could help me fill the gaps." "Well, I assume you've already looked through the library here at Caranarthex." Renna's eyes lit up. "Library?" Lucy raised an eyebrow. "You didn't know?" "I never saw one around here, come to think of it." "That's because it's downstairs." "I never saw any library downstairs. We go down there all the time for training." "No, the downstairs. Caranarthex is bigger than what you see on the outside." Oh. This was new and highly intriguing information to Renna. "I wouldn't think of looking for it, though, if I were you. There are many reasons why Regana keeps the parts of the house closed off, and she wouldn't like you snooping about." "Well, yeah, of course not." Renna knew better than to inquire further, as Lucy was likely already suspicious. "After all, I already seem to be doing quite well in our practices. I don't think I need any more help." This got Lucy back to silent seething, her displeasure wiping away any concern about Renna's new plans for tonight, or so Renna hoped. At times, Renna had thought it strange that such a big manor belonging to such an accomplished witch didn't have a room or six for a library. Morgana had always brought them the books they used to study witchcraft, so there had never been a reasonable time to ask her if she had a larger collection somewhere in the manor. But now Renna knew, and all she had to do was find it. She was sure she would be able to find something there that could help her dive deeper into the Book of Abramelin. With something to look forward to, the small remainder of the day stretched on like molasses, and her divided attention caused Renna to lose her edge during the evening training sessions. Regana noticed it and wasted no opportunities to chastise her. Renna was mainly worried that Lucy would notice a sudden change and connect it to their earlier conversation, but she seemed too occupied with regaining her superiority to be bothered with that. Finally, after darkness had settled thickly into all corners of the house, Renna gave up on waiting. She was never entirely sure where Regana was in the manor at these times. She seemed to have her personal space up on the highest floor of the house, which she retreated to after the day's training was over. But it was quite possible for her to still be skulking around the stone-walled chambers below the house, brewing up who knows what. The time before, when Renna had found her with a tapestry, had felt out of the ordinary in some way, perhaps even a bit contrived. Trying to figure out what strings Regana was pulling was a rabbit hole Renna was not interested in going down, though. While there weren't any explicit rules about Renna wandering about the house at late hours, it was safe to say that an encounter with Regana at such a time would not be a pleasant experience. So, before Renna set out, she cast a simple muffling spell on herself, which would hopefully make the floorboards and hinges creak less when she moved them. She was also tempted to try a spell that would grant some degree of shadowy cloaking, ideally like what Sarah had done back in Leaderville. According to the Book of Abermelon, it required magical formulae that were tough even for Renna at this point, so she wasn't entirely sure she could pull it off without a hitch. She would have to rely on her natural reflexes and intuition born out of many years of hide-and-seek games at Inglenook. And those were not to be taken for granted. She had held the esteemed house title of Shadow Stealther for many years in a row. Renna snuck through the hallways and slid down staircases, her fingers guiding her by the way of the walls. She moved slowly but steadily, remembering the layout of each room she passed through, until she opened the door to the basement. On the off chance that Regana was down there and she could somehow see in the dark, an ability that Renna would not put beyond her, with or without magic, she had to forgo her flashlight for now and make her way forward into the darkness that was so thick she found herself trying to wipe it out of her eyes. She went first through a series of rooms they held training exercises in. One of them was a chamber with a large cauldron hanging over a central fireplace, which thankfully granted some illumination from a bed of glowing embers in the hearth. She saw no one else around to attend it, so Renna ventured forth and tried one of the heavy doors in the far wall that she had never approached before. To her surprise, it was open. Renna figured Regana would have a lock as the first line of defense against any trespassers, or some magical traps that would punish them. Renna spent a couple minutes checking to see if this was the case, but she couldn't pick up a trace of anything. Finally, she took a deep breath and crossed the threshold. No change. If she had just been cursed into oblivion, Renna would have to deal with that later. She couldn't let paranoia distract her now. The hallway beyond continued elaborating on the dungeon aesthetic that the cauldron room had introduced. Regana clearly didn't expect visitors in this wing of the manor, so dust and grime took up residence and looked to be making unauthorized renovations. At this point, Renna turned on her flashlight. If she had tripped a sensor spell, Regana would already know she was there anyway. Mustering baseless courage, she let the light guide her even further. She encountered a couple split paths, but neither way went far before ending in a door. All were unlocked. Most of them opened into rooms that were bursting with junk. Renna was sure she wouldn't get lost, but at the same time, the maze-like atmosphere of the underground paths made her wish that she had a ball of twine or some breadcrumbs. Finally, she found what she was looking for. Renna pushed open another door, only halfway before the clutter pushed back, and saw how much of the room's contents were books, in bad need of some bookshelves. There had been a valiant effort to put them into stacks at some point, but stacks became slides, and slides became piles in a great mass of junk. Her flashlight beam sniffed about, looking for covers with readable titles. There were many to choose from, but few that remained as legible between the binding, as Renna found out while picking through the horizontal library. There were a large number of books written in the Russian alphabet, which sadly she couldn't hope to translate. Some of these volumes appeared to be handmade, as if they were someone's personal journals, written so long ago that the paper was brittle and cracking. As Renna sat amidst the literary mounds and let her curiosity dance under the beam of her flashlight, familiar words and phrases began to pop out at her from some of the pages. She unslung her backpack from her shoulder and brought out the Book of Opera Melon, glad she had bothered carrying it down here. Her flight flicked from one book to the next rapidly, as Renna started fitting together a puzzle she thought she'd never find the missing pieces to. She dug deeper into the clutter, trying to find others that contained relevant writings. She wanted to sit here and read through everything, just to make sure she left nothing behind, but the current environment made that a dreamer's task. The best she could do was temporarily adopt several of the most promising reads from this underground orphanage, where things went when Regana had decided they lacked persistent usefulness. Renna pulled the door to the room shut, as it had been when she found it. Several books were wrapped in a shirt and stowed in her backpack. She assumed she would give them back at some point, but it was questionable whether Regana even knew they were down here and in that unorganized heap anyway. While her grandaunt's trash pile had turned out to be Renna's treasure, she still figured that Regana must surely have a more prestigious and well-curated library somewhere else. Perhaps the floor below. Now that she thought of it, she hadn't yet descended to the subfloor that Lucy had told her about. None of the other doors she had opened led to a staircase. If there was more to find, Renna figured it would be worth finding, but perhaps not tonight, as she had enough reading material for now. She started back and turned the corner she had come around earlier, but ended up at a dead end. That was strange. The way back to the entrance wasn't far, so there was little risk of getting lost. She backed up and made another turn and found a door that led to another junk room. Back to the last intersection, down one way, another dead end. Renna's annoyance was preparing to move over and let panic take a seat. She stood there, eyes closed, willing her mind into a calmer state. She could spend some time trying to convince herself that she was just getting confused, but in this case the more obvious answer was magic. She knew she would have been able to get back. There was no reason why she should suddenly be stuck in a maze without an exit. And to be honest, it really seemed like something that was bound to happen in the creepy underground hallways of a witch's manor. Renna reached out with her mind and tried to detect the auras of any spells that might be causing the illusion, but she grasped nothing. Whatever was happening was beyond her ability, meaning she might be more stuck than she had thought. She wandered around a little more, walking past the book room a couple times, and finally resting herself against a wall. She wasn't thinking anymore. There wasn't anything more she could think of to do. She simply had to wait until inspiration came to find her. She switched off her flashlight. At least in the complete darkness, she could pretend to be anywhere but here. Something did come. After several intervals of time had passed, it was too dark to know if they were minutes or hours, Renna felt a familiar fuzzy presence with her. It nuzzled against her consciousness, finally daring to come close. Renna made no attempt to reach out to it. What good would it do now, after all? It skirted about her mind, pawing at thoughts that hid in the shadows. It found itself in a hallway, one that Renna remembered from somewhere but didn't recognize. It turned to her and bade her to follow. She got up, not knowing what else to do. She walked along, feeling it match its pace to hers. It turned a corner and she turned after it. It stood in front of a door. This door was different than the others. It felt older, but it looked newer. It had a coat of red paint on it that somehow stood out in the darkness. Perhaps it was the beautiful gold trim. The door handle was cool to her touch and gave it the slightest pressure. The hinges moved noiselessly as the door swung open. The set of stairs, leading her down. Renna placed a foot on each step, her muscles moving with memories that were still hidden to her. The wide room, made of cold, smooth stone, with a shallow vaulted ceiling reminiscent of a church or a crypt. The pit, sunken a foot lower than the main floor, with a long stone slab in the center, like a sarcophagus for a once great lord. The bookshelves of dark, fragrant wood that lined the far walls, with rows of tomes bound in black leather. The basin off to the left side, it was on Renna's right when she had been lying there, that was filled with water most times. Once it was cloudy and red. Had it been blood, or just a potion? The standing candelabras that ringed the pit were made of wrought iron. The first thing Renna had always seen was the flicker of many little flames, popping one by one into her hazy vision, like fluttering fairies come to see her awaken. On the opposite side of the basin, the large cabinets that kept all the ingredients were gone unneeded. Renna had always counted the number of times she heard the cabinet doors opening and closing before the terror would start again. It was usually 4. After 4, she would shut her eyes tight and try to block out everything. Before she could feel the world melt away from her again. Sometimes it took longer. She always felt a small burst of joy when she heard 5, 6, even 7 clicks of the cabinet doors, amidst the clinks and clatters of their bottles. She didn't know why. Maybe just because it was a break in the pattern. Maybe it meant she would stop soon. It probably didn't mean anything, but that never stopped her from wanting it to. Renna was standing right next to the altar now. It still had the same shape, slightly concave near the center, so she fit into a kind of shallow groove that she always thought made it a bit more comfortable. The chains lay upon the floor. They were slender. Renna always thought they would break one day. There were 21 links on the left-hand chain and 22 on the right. Her right hand always had a bit more mobility than the other. It probably didn't mean anything, but to her it had. No matter how small they were, some things had to mean something. They were trying to understand anything outside of that was simply too much. Whenever the ritual started, Regana would always come here first. She would stand here, watching her. She would extend her hand out with a knife, and then she would put the point right here. She was finally here again. Memory had led her back here, and now memory had opened its maw and sunk its teeth deeply into the hand she had dared to offer it.